She moved slowly, tapping her cane across the marble floor, guided only by memory and instinct. A blind black girl, barely 17, stepping into a luxury car dealership alone. The chatter stopped. Salesmen watched her like she was a stray. One whispered something crude. Another laughed. She asked softly if someone could help her. The manager looked her over, plain clothes, dark glasses, walking stick, and waved her off with a smirk. "We don't do test rides for fun," he said, loud enough for customers to hear. A few turned to look. No one stepped in. No one questioned it when he placed his hand on her shoulder and walked her out. But what they didn't know was that the land beneath their $1 million showroom wasn't theirs. It belonged to someone else. And the next morning, when a black Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up and she stepped out again, this time not alone, everyone inside would learn exactly who they had just humiliated. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. Zaria had grown up in a quiet house at the edge of the city, surrounded by silence and grace. The kind of wealth her family carried didn't glitter. It hummed softly in the background. Old wood, private libraries, and the low rhythm of jazz, spilling from speakers no one could see. Her father, Elijah Mercer, was a reclusive tech billionaire, not the kind that gave speeches or posed for magazines, but the kind that kept his name off buildings and his head down in work. He raised his only child with intention. There were no brand names on her clothes, no limousines waiting outside school. Zaria took music lessons with neighborhood kids and spent summers volunteering at a community center downtown. Her blindness was never framed as a tragedy. From an early age, Elijah taught her to see with her ears, to read with her hands, and to lead with her voice. By 17, Zaria had become known in her small circle for her quiet brilliance and independence. She could read 4 languages in Braille, play piano by ear, and walk 3 blocks alone without a guide. When she got into her first-choice university, an Ivy League program for philosophy and design, her father asked what gift she wanted to mark the moment. "I want to choose my own car," she said, her tone calm but certain. "I want to walk into a place and not be underestimated." He nodded once. No further questions. Zaria spent a week researching models by touch, shape, and accessibility. Her heart settled on a specific luxury sedan, low to the ground, smooth to the hand, with technology that could guide her voice commands. But she didn't want it delivered. She wanted to go in herself, to make the decision in person like any other young adult. On a bright Tuesday morning, dressed in a soft beige blouse and black jeans, Zaria took a rideshare across the city to a dealership known for its luxury fleet. Her father didn't come with her. That was part of the plan. She didn't want a hand on her shoulder or a wallet clearing a path. She just wanted to be seen. But the moment she stepped through those glass doors, she could feel it. The pause, the silence, the stiffness in the room. They didn't see a future college student. They didn't see a customer. They saw a problem. The air inside the dealership shifted the moment Zaria's cane tapped the tile. It was the kind of silence that did not come from awe, but confusion. Behind the marble counters and glass walls, 3 salesmen turned their heads. One of them, tall, red tie, clipped beard, tilted his head as if trying to understand what he was looking at. She moved with grace, shoulders straight, cane clicking lightly ahead of her, measuring distance. "Can you? I help you?" someone asked, more out of obligation than welcome. Zaria nodded. "Yes, I'm looking for a vehicle, something in the executive sedan range." The man blinked. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't fumbling or lost. She was here for a reason. Before he could answer. Another salesman walked over. He glanced at Zaria's cane, then at her plain clothes. His mouth curled in a crooked smile. "Honey, the used lot is down the block. You probably want something a little more manageable." She didn't move. "No, I'm in the right place." Laughter flickered somewhere behind her. A receptionist covered her mouth. Someone whispered, "Is she serious?" Zaria reached into her bag and pulled out a folded list. It had braille across the top and a handwritten note underneath. "I have specs I'd like to review," she said, her voice low but firm. Before the list could reach anyone's hand, a third figure appeared. Older, heavier, with a polished watch and the slight arrogance of management. His name tag read Ken, General Manager. "Ma'am," he began, his tone a practiced blend of condescension and control. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You can't just walk in here touching things. These cars are worth more than some homes." Zaria stood still. Her hands did not tremble, her face showed no shock. "I haven't touched anything," she said. "I came to test a model. I have the financial means and—" Ken cut her off. "Look, we don't do test rides for fun. We're not a theme park." He motioned toward the exit with a tight smile. "Now I'm going to walk you out, all right? Just to keep things calm." Across the showroom, a young couple near the convertible display turned their heads. The man looked confused. The woman frowned. Still, no one said anything. Zaria held her ground for a moment longer. Not in defiance, but in grace. "Is this how you treat all customers?" she asked. Ken sighed. "Let's not make this a thing." He placed a hand on her elbow. Not forcefully, but like someone guiding a child who didn't know better. Zaria allowed herself to be moved. Her cane ticked the floor softly. They walked past the bright lights, past the glimmering hoods and chrome. Rims past the quiet stares of employees who said nothing. Outside, the sun hit hard. Ken released her arm. "There's a cab stand 2 blocks over," he said. "Good luck to you." Then he turned and went back inside. A teenager in a hoodie had watched the whole thing from across the street. Phone in hand, he hit record a few seconds too late, but still caught the door closing behind her. Zaria stood quietly on the curb. She didn't call her father. She didn't cry. She folded her list and placed it back into her bag. Behind her, through the showroom windows, the laughter resumed. Inside, someone said, "She really thought she was going to buy something?" Another voice joined. "She probably couldn't even see the cars." The receptionist chuckled behind her desk. Ken walked past her and adjusted his collar. "Let's get back to real clients," he said. But what none of them noticed was the small security camera embedded in the corner above the entrance. What they forgot was who owned the land beneath their feet and who would be reviewing the footage. The sidewalk was warm beneath Zaria's feet, spring sun on her face, a light breeze brushing against her arms. None of it softened the weight. In her chest. She stood alone outside the dealership, the noise of the city returning slowly as if mocking the silence she had just left behind. Her cane found a crack in the pavement. She adjusted. She always adjusted. She considered calling her father, not to intervene but just to speak, to hear the steadiness in his voice. But then she remembered his words. "You don't need a witness to have dignity. You carry that by yourself." So she lowered her phone back into her bag and took a slow breath. Inside the dealership, laughter still echoed faintly through the glass. She turned and walked away. A woman in a blazer passed her on the sidewalk, glanced at her face, and then turned her eyes quickly to the ground, as if the discomfort of witnessing something wrong was easier to ignore than to acknowledge. Halfway down the block, Zaria stopped beneath a tree and sat on a bench. Her hands were still, her jaw tight. Not in anger, but in the kind of silence that builds when something inside has been ignored too long. She thought about all the times people had assumed she needed help when she didn't, talked louder when they found out she was blind, spoken over her, walked past her. This wasn't new, but this was public. This wasn't a door not being held open or someone skipping her place in line. This was a place of business, licensed and polished, telling her to her face, "You don't belong here." She thought about how calm she had stayed, how polite, how her voice hadn't cracked, not even once, how she had held onto her cane like a lifeline and refused to let her expression betray her. She had done everything right. And still she had been walked out like a stray dog. Across the street, the teenager who had recorded her stood under a bus stop awning, still watching, his phone down now, his eyes on her, not with pity, but with something softer, like respect, like regret. He didn't come over, he didn't need to. His silence was enough. Zaria rose from the bench and kept walking. Not fast, not slow, just forward. By the time she reached the rideshare pickup zone, her breathing had returned to its normal rhythm. She tapped her cane, located the curb, and waited. The driver pulled up a minute later. The woman behind the wheel looked surprised when she saw Zaria but said nothing. Just opened the door. Zaria slid in. "Where to?" the driver asked. "Home," Zaria said. The ride was quiet. City noise outside, the soft hum of the electric engine within. The driver glanced back in the mirror once, then kept driving. When Zaria arrived at the gate of her house, tall, ivy-covered, discreet, she didn't say a word. She simply walked through the side entrance, up the gravel path, and into the stillness of her world. Her father was in the garden, kneeling beside a bed of herbs. He didn't look up when he heard her steps. He waited. She sat beside him. Dirt under her fingers. Warm sun overhead. "It happened again," she said quietly. He didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. He simply nodded, brushed soil from her palm and placed a rosemary sprig in it. "What would you like to do?" he asked. She paused. "Nothing, yet." And he understood, because sometimes the deepest dignity is in not reacting, not in the moment. Sometimes it waits for the next morning, when silence will walk back into the place that tried to shame it, wearing polished shoes, followed by a presence that cannot be ignored. At 10:02 the next morning, the hum of a V12 engine broke the stillness outside the dealership. A black Rolls-Royce Phantom glided to the curb, quiet, deliberate, gleaming under the morning sun. Its silver grille caught the light like a mirror, and the spirit of ecstasy stood tall at the hood, unshaken by the wind. Doors opened slowly. Zaria stepped out first, cane in hand, her posture unchanged from the day before. But this time, a tall man in a dark charcoal suit followed behind her. No tie, just presence, the kind that needed no introduction. Elijah Mercer stood still for a moment, scanning the building with calm eyes. He did not dress for attention. He did not look angry. He looked exact. They entered the dealership in silence. No receptionist greeted them. No one moved, until Ken, the manager from the day before, stepped out of his office with a confused smile. "Good morning. Welcome in. Can I help?" Then he saw her. And behind her, him. He stopped mid-sentence. "Mr. Mercer," Zaria said quietly. "This is Ken." The name didn't need to be confirmed. Ken's face had already begun to drain. Elijah reached into the pocket of his jacket and removed a folded piece of paper. He handed it to Ken without a word. Ken opened it, read, stared. "Termination of lease, effective immediately." "The terms have been reviewed," Elijah said, voice low, slow. "Violation of inclusivity clauses, breach of contract. Through conduct. You have 30 days to vacate." Ken looked around as if someone might step in, but the room was still. The same salesman who had laughed the day before now stood quiet near the glass wall. The receptionist avoided eye contact. This isn't how it usually goes," Ken stammered. "We didn't know." "That was the problem," Elijah said. "You didn't ask, you didn't listen." Ken opened his mouth again, but Elijah turned away, not in dismissal, but in finality. Zaria stood quietly beside him, her hands folded around her cane. She hadn't said much. She hadn't needed to. Her presence was enough. And still, she hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't demanded revenge. She stood in the same place that had humiliated her, and simply allowed the truth to arrive behind her. As they left, she turned her head slightly, not toward the staff, but toward the young receptionist at the front desk. The girl who had laughed yesterday was now wiping a silent tear from her cheek. The Rolls-Royce pulled away, not in fury, but in peace. And the building behind them, so polished, so proud, felt smaller somehow, because it had just been reminded who it belonged to. Have you ever been judged for how you look or where you're from? Share your story in the comments. By noon that day, the video had made its rounds. The teenager who'd filmed Zaria's ejection posted the clip online with a caption that read only, "She never raised her voice. But they still made her leave." It was barely 30 seconds long. No shouting, no violence, just a black girl in dark glasses and a cane being walked out of a luxury dealership by a smiling white man in a suit. But it was enough. In the silence of that clip, people heard everything. It didn't take long for the pieces to fall into place. A few internet sleuths recognized the dealership. Someone else matched the manager's face with an earlier news story about diversity training initiatives that had never materialized. Within hours, the dealership's Yelp rating dropped from 4.7 to 2.1. Corporate offices received emails. Former customers shared their own uneasy stories. A woman in Dallas recounted being ignored in the same chain for 30 minutes until her white husband walked in. By evening, the parent company released a generic statement about taking inclusion seriously. But the damage was already done. What set this incident apart wasn't just the racism. It was the restraint. Zaria hadn't cursed. Her father hadn't made threats, no lawsuits, no press conferences. They had simply shown up and walked away. And in doing so, they'd created a vacuum loud enough for the world to step into. The dealership's CEO scheduled a press event to address the misunderstanding, but when reporters asked whether the company would meet with Zaria or her family, there was no answer. Elijah Mercer did not respond to media requests. He declined interviews, speaking only through a brief written statement. "My daughter handled herself with more strength and composure than most adults I know. That is all that needs to be said." But others spoke. The National Federation for the Blind released a statement condemning the treatment of visually impaired individuals in public spaces. Petition began circulating, requiring all luxury retailers with ADA compliance certificates to undergo annual equity training, not just for disability, but for race-based bias. Within 2 days, it had over 400,000 signatures. Behind the scenes, pressure mounted. The dealership's corporate lawyers reviewed the lease termination clause and confirmed Mercer had every legal right to evict. The property belonged to him through a shell company, quietly held for tax purposes. There would be no reversal, no appeal. At the local level, the city council, already under scrutiny for gaps in its equity review policies, announced a new advisory committee on accessible and respectful service standards. Zaria didn't attend the announcement. She didn't need to. She had already spoken, without saying much at all. Across social media, stories poured in. A blind girl in Philadelphia shared her fear of entering malls alone. A black student in Chicago recounted being followed through an electronics store just in case. Parents wrote about teaching their children how to walk with pride, even when the world refuses to see them. One post stood out. A woman who said she brought her own daughter, also blind, also black, to the front doors of that same dealership, days later, not to buy anything, just to stand there. To show her where dignity was denied, the mother wrote, and where grace stood taller than any car inside. In boardrooms and back channels, change began to stir, not because of a protest, but because of a presence. Because the girl they tried to erase had become a symbol of all the ones who never even got the chance to walk through the door. By the end of the month, the dealership was gone. The windows that once reflected light now reflected emptiness. The glossy posters of luxury vehicles were taken down, the reception desk removed. The nameplate scraped clean. Only the outline of the letters remained, ghosts of a brand that had stood there too proud, too long. In its place, a new kind of business quietly began to move in. No press release, no grand opening, just a slow, deliberate restoration. Elijah Mercer had donated the space to a new partnership, an independent, black-owned luxury auto collective that focused on inclusivity, accessibility, and community service. The group specialized in selling vehicles designed with adaptive features, trained staff to assist with dignity, and offered apprenticeships for disabled youth interested in engineering. One of their first consultants was Zaria, not because she asked, but because they did. She accepted the role with the same calm she carried into that building the first day. She reviewed floor layouts for tactile flow. She gave feedback on voice command systems for blind drivers. She asked that counters be lowered, surfaces be smooth, and staff be taught not just procedure, but presence. Her photo wasn't on the wall. Her name wasn't in brochures, but her influence was everywhere. In the quietness of the showroom, in the respectful way customers were greeted, in the deliberate absence of assumptions. Her first purchase came 2 months later. Not the most expensive model, not the flashiest. A mid-size hybrid sedan with smooth controls, responsive technology, and a voice command system she'd helped test herself. She arrived with her father, as calm as ever. She walked in unannounced, greeted every staff member by name, ran her fingers gently along the hood of the car, and nodded once. "I'll take this one." There were no cameras, no statements, just a transaction carried out with respect. The keys were placed in her hand, not with fanfare, but with understanding. And this time, as she exited the building, the glass doors parted, not for a girl misunderstood, but for a woman who had changed something far bigger than herself. Outside, a small group of neighborhood kids stood watching. Some had heard the story. Others just saw someone who looked like them walking out with quiet power. Zaria stopped, turned slightly toward them, and gave a gentle nod. It wasn't a wave, it wasn't a speech, but it was enough. Her story rippled beyond that one dealership. Corporate offices across the nation reviewed training policies. A luxury auto brand added a new clause requiring ADA and racial sensitivity training for all frontline workers. And in one small city, a mandatory education program launched across all high-end retail establishments, focused on serving customers with disabilities, especially those from historically marginalized communities. No credits rolled, no headlines boomed, but something changed. The story didn't end with revenge, it ended with responsibility. Zaria never raised her voice, never gave an interview, never returned to that first dealership again. She didn't need to, because now, when a young black girl with a cane walks into a showroom, any showroom, there's a better chance someone will pause, not to judge, but to listen. Months passed. Seasons turned. The city moved on, as cities do. But quiet things continued to grow. Letters began arriving at Zaria's home, not from executives or media, but from strangers, parents of blind children, teachers in underfunded schools, girls who had watched the video and seen, maybe for the first time, that strength didn't have to be loud to be powerful. Some wrote about how they were learning to walk into rooms without shrinking. Some asked how to hold their heads higher when the world tried to make them invisible. One girl, only 12, wrote, "They told me I don't look like someone who drives, but I saw you, and now I think maybe I can." Zaria kept the letters, a wooden box near her piano. She didn't reply to them all, but she read every single one. She still walked alone sometimes, through bookstores, across sidewalks, down familiar paths, her cane in one hand, stillness in the other, and though the world hadn't changed completely, something inside it had tilted, just enough for someone else to take one step farther than before, not because of outrage, but because of quiet dignity, because of a choice to stand firm without needing applause, because one girl walked into a place built to reject her and walked out having transformed it. If this story moved you, if you believe dignity can change the world, share it, because someone else out there still needs to know. Silence can be power too.